Hey everyone, Judicial Watch President Tom Fitton here with our weekly update on social media. Thank you as always for joining us. An important update this week because I'm going to give you what I believe to be exclusive details and insight into something I haven't talked about publicly yet, which is a grand jury appearance I was forced into by the Biden Justice Department. So you'll want to stick around for that. And it was corrupt and abusive, as you might imagine, so I'll give you the details there. And speaking of corruption and abuse, I'll also be talking about the latest fight between the Congress and FBI Director Wray over a document the FBI is hiding or has been hiding about potential Biden corruption. And on top of that, Judicial Watch has not been cowed by the Biden Justice Department. We just filed a major lawsuit for information about the unprecedented attack on Trump and specifically who's behind it. First up, though, I want to talk about this grand jury appearance. I testified. The media was all excited back in February when I showed up outside the courthouse. They had a video of me walking in. I don't know if we have the video of that, or maybe you can go look it up. Fitton testifying before the grand jury. It was the beginning of February, I think the 2nd or the 3rd of February. And it was a grand jury looking into the Mar-a-Lago document hoax, the abuse of Trump there, and of course targeting Trump and others over their efforts to challenge and dispute the Biden election, other First Amendment protected activity that should be nowhere near a grand jury. And I talked about it first this week, at least publicly, on Jesse Watters' show on Fox News, and here's the first part of my appearance.
Tom Fitton was in one of these trumped-up grand juries for 4 hours, and he's here with the inside scoop. All right, so Tom, take us through this like a story. How did this start?
So I get home from significant skin cancer surgery. I'm lying on the couch recovering. And in the evening, knock, 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 a few hours after I get home, knock, knock, knock. 2 FBI agents are at the door with a subpoena for me to testify to the grand jury about presumably this Mar-a-Lago issue. Although the FBI agents helpfully noted that I did have an Amazon package there on the porch as well. The FBI agents, as you can see, they were pleasant enough. They at least looked young to me. But I was laying out on the couch. Literally had, as I said, major surgery, skin cancer surgery. And I opened the door. And thankfully, I opened the door, not my kids or my wife. That wouldn't have been fun for them. And I've got the giant bandages on my face, as you might imagine. And, they've got this subpoena, in the middle of November. And by the way, in retrospect, the timing of that subpoena to require me to testify and produce documents, I didn't know this at the time, but subsequently I did find out, because we all found out it was around the same time the Joe Biden had to admit, or they found out and had to grapple with the fact that Joe Biden also had documents from his time as vice president and from his time as senator that were allegedly classified. And so what do? They come and harass me and Judicial Watch. And of course, after all this is said and done in terms of the back and forth with our lawyers and such, they wanted documents from me, they wanted documents from Judicial Watch. And what was frustrating is, typically as a witness, and I was just a witness, I wasn't a target of a grand jury investigation, I was a witness. Oftentimes you just go in and you provide a proffer. And a proffer is a session where you go in and you talk to the prosecutors. You're not before the grand jury. Obviously, you're not ever allowed to lie. Not that that was even an issue. And that was set up after our attorney reached out to them. And then all of a sudden, they're pushing and pushing. We're trying to figure out a date because I was not well for the proffer session. And then they decide, you know what, we changed our mind. We want you to come in for a grand jury appearance. Now that never happens. As best as I understand it, it never happens. You've got a proffer set up and you go through the proffer. Instead, they reasserted the grand jury subpoena, and I had to go in, which I did ultimately on February 2nd. Now, of course, we could have fought it, but here in the District of Columbia, the judges don't like Trump, and that probably wasn't going to go anywhere. So we went in and I testified. And so this is what happens. You go in, you testify. There's, in this case, now they initially told me they wanted to talk to me about Mar-a-Lago. But then the day before, they said, oh, well, we may take 5 minutes to talk about, some January 6th issues. And it turned out, much of what they wanted me to testify about was about the election disputes. But you go into what is a smallish room in the courthouse here in the District of Columbia, the federal courthouse. And they're just, there are 23 American citizens. I think there were 23. I think there's a minimum that has to be there, and it struck me they were at the maximum, which I think is 23, sitting there in the grand jury, and there's some tables in the front in the room. Just think of it like a classroom or a college classroom style, but much smaller. And I guess the kind of funny thing is someone started to try to swear me in, and I was looking around. I was like, who is swearing me in? And it was the grand jury foreman who was sitting up front. He said, I'm the one swearing you in. So I sat down, and I had to suffer through questions from not one, not two, but 3 government prosecutors. And when you go into a grand jury, at least I would, thankfully many of you and almost all of you will never have to do this. You're thinking, well, maybe there's something here, right? Maybe there's a crime that took place and I don't know anything about it, but maybe I'm going to find out about it and I'm going to be like, holy shnikes, right? But it became quickly apparent that there was nothing there, and that it was a fishing expedition. It's just a political opposition research. As I said to Jesse Waters and others, it was like sitting at an MSNBC debate for 4 hours, arguing with prosecutors over tweets I sent, over emails that I had discussions with, where I was directing it to President Trump about election disputes. And of course, the big issue, at least as far as I was concerned, was this document hoax investigation where the Justice Department, the National Archives, changed their legal position when it came to the rights of a president in terms of his personal and confidential records, or his personal records versus presidential records. And we had sued for records against Bill Clinton, or at least against the archives, for them to go get Bill Clinton's records that he had kept. There were recordings that looked to us to be presidential records and may have been and should have been classified. And they came back and told us, no, you can't get those records. The court said there's no way anyone can get records once he leaves office, because he has ultimate say as to what's personal versus what's presidential. And the Justice Department told the court, they went beyond that and said, well, we just presume they're all personal if he has them. But they took a very different position for Trump. And of course, Judicial Watch was front and center in calling them out on that. And they didn't like the fact that there was evidence and news that I had told President Trump, well, that's outrageous that that they're going after you on this issue, because this was their prior position. And of course, we were public about this as well. And we sued for records about the raid. We've sued for records about their abuses of Trump under this document hoax scandal. And what do we get in return? A grand jury subpoena. And and to deal with a grand jury subpoena is an expensive proposition. We had to hire outside attorneys. It costs a lot of money to do the document search and then a legal analysis of the documents and things like that. We're a nonprofit, right? So money that we could be spending holding the Justice Department accountable, and time we could be using holding the Justice Department accountable, the Biden administration accountable, and other corrupt politicians and bureaucrats accountable, we had to waste facing this retaliatory fishing expedition, abusive process targeting Judicial Watch. And the grand jurors, they were paying attention. One of them fell asleep. I was laughing because afterwards I was laughing. You look at it and laugh a little bit afterwards. because it's an intense situation. You're sitting there going in a back and forth political sparring match with the prosecutors, and it's intense for me, as you might imagine. And I look over to the grand juror, one of them, and the gentleman who was front and center, and he's dead asleep. And frankly, after 4 hours, I didn't want to listen to myself talk anymore, because it was just so petty and really so ridiculous. And I didn't see any evidence of crimes in any, you're like, well, maybe there's something here I don't know about. Well, there obviously was, because I couldn't figure out what crimes they were investigating. Certainly they didn't question me in a way that made me think I saw something that would be useful to a criminal investigation. There was a lot of political debate, which was outrageous. As far as I was concerned, I was being questioned on First Amendment protected activity and my work as president of Judicial Watch. So the abuse, not only, as we know from the grand jury processes, and you know this generally, and as Trump has said, it's not just about him, it's about others. And so Trump was not the only crime victim here, and the only victim of government abuse and corruption. Judicial Watch is a victim of government abuse and corruption. I'm a victim of government abuse and corruption. I mean, I want you to imagine being at home in the evening and having, the knock at the door. And you think, well, you find out it's an FBI, 2 FBI agents. Well, every other knock after that, you may think, well, that may be the FBI again. And of course, they want you to think about that, right? They want you to be intimidated. And I tell you, I'm not going to be intimidated. Judicial Watch is going to continue to push for the rule of law against this Justice Department, against this corrupted FBI, and the other deep state actors that are abusing the powers entrusted to them by the American people to target and jail their political enemies. And one of the worst aspects of the questioning that I thought, in terms of ethics and corruption, is that one of the prosecutors said to me, I want to know, are you going to talk about this grand jury appearance with anyone? And I said, I don't know. I said, maybe, to our lawyers, that's privileged. And then he asked again, I want to know, are you going to talk about it with anyone? I said, I don't know, maybe, it's public now, I may have to address it. Then he argued with me on that. And then he said, well, and he asked me a third time, are you going to talk about it? And I said, I don't know. And then he said afterwards, he figured out maybe he had gone a little too far in my view. He said, well, just so you know, you're allowed to talk about what went on here. You have every right to do so. And I said to him, well, I don't, given your questions, it's kind of chilling. So what he was trying to do, which was really outrageous, was get me to swear under oath I wouldn't talk about this. What happened to me there, and what happened to Judicial Watch there. And of course, once you swear under oath, even if you have the right to, you're going to be hesitant to do it. Thankfully, I didn't, and said I don't know. But what an abuse, trying to scare me into thinking I can't talk about it. Really outrageous. So Judicial Watch, as I said, isn't going to back down. We are investigating the document abuses of Trump here. This whole debate about his records, you may have seen the news. The CNN was all excited because there was a tape that they didn't hear in which Trump supposedly said he had a document that may or may not be classified, and I couldn't really figure that out based on the tape, or based on CNN's analysis of someone who supposedly listened to the tape. So they're just leaking and making up revelations that aren't really revelations because, as I said, under the prior Justice Department position on the law, documents in a former president's possession are presumptively unclassified, and there's no one who can second guess it. But one of the other interesting things about what the Smith operation is up to is their secrecy around it. They do a lot of leaking, but they don't want to tell you some basic information that we have a right to know as American citizens, namely, who's on this team targeting Trump. Because as you saw from the Durham report, and the Mueller operation, it was full of the whole investigation, both investigations, were infected, and I would say were created only because of anti-Trump animus and politics. I think, Judicial Watch, I know, had done analysis of the Mueller team. I don't think he hired any current Republicans. Maybe a few former Republicans. I think Mueller was a former Republican, or maybe an actual Republican. But everyone else was a Democrat or Democrat supporting. And so, given what had happened under Mueller, given what the Durham report had uncovered and what we generally knew about the anti-Trump bias in the FBI and Justice Department targeting of Trump, we thought it would be interesting to find out who was working for Jack Smith. So Jack Smith, of course, is a special counsel whose grand jury I appeared before. And Smith's team came back, and the Justice Department generally came back and said they don't want to give us the records. We had asked for records, what did we say? For staff rousters or similar records that would indicate the employees of the Office of Special Counsel Jack Smith. The Justice Department responded stating that the records responsive have been located, so they know what we want because they have them, and have been withheld pursuant to Exemption 6 and 7A. Exemption 6 is the privacy exemption. So I guess you can be a top official at the Justice Department, a senior prosecutor or senior FBI agent investigating the former president of the United States in an unprecedented fashion, and you have a privacy interest in keeping the American people from finding out who you are and what you're doing with their tax dollars? And Exemption 7A pertains to records or information compiled for law enforcement purposes. Well, I don't even know how that applies here. I mean, we're not asking for confidential sources. Maybe to the degree they're implicated here, then they can withhold those. But it's not a basis to withhold this basic information that I have highlighted before we've been able to get from prior special counsels. Now, you may recall that Smith was appointed in, guess when? November. That was around the time they gave me the grand jury. I think I got the subpoena just shortly before Smith was appointed. And the first investigation, as I said, involves Trump's handling of information from his days as president. And the other part of the investigation is basically targeting him for disputing the 2020 election. I mean, it's so nakedly political. It's just, and I saw it directly because there, as I said, there was no there in the grand jury investigation that I was forced to go through. So I'm a witness to it, right? I saw that they just wanted to argue with me about matters of politics, not of anything that was criminal, best as I could tell. Given the overwhelming evidence of how, anti-Trump bias disclosed in the Durham report, it infected that investigation into both Trump and, of course, in terms of protecting Hillary. It is urgent that Americans be able to find out just who again is investigating Trump in another unprecedented, dubious investigation. And Jack Smith, the special prosecutor, isn't above the law. Just like I am required to testify before a grand jury, I went and testified. I'm not above the law, but Jack Smith and the Justice Department aren't above the law in terms of their obligations under federal law to disclose to the American people what they're up to. And we have a right to know about just who is working on this politicized investigation into Trump. Now, Judicial Watch already uncovered information about Special Counsel Mueller's operation. We found information out about his budget. I think we sued about his budget. And certainly we asked for information about his staff and got a lot of information about his staff, including, we got such detail that his top deputy, Andrew Weissman, who was an anti-Trump fanatic in the Justice Department, we had, information about who Weissman was interviewing. So it's not like it's unprecedented that this information would be disclosed. We should know who the top people are investigating Trump. A Judicial Watch lawsuit also, as I said, uncovered the calendar entries of his top deputy, Andrew Weissman, Mueller's top deputy, Andrew Weissman. So it wasn't even just, it went beyond who he was interviewing, for the jobs, but what he was doing on a day-to-day basis. Now, Jack Smith is an interesting character. He comes out of the Justice Department. He's a longtime Justice Department appointee, or civil servant, I think. I don't think he was a political guy. I think this was his first political appointment, although I think he was a U.S. attorney. Well, his background is what it was. But I do know he was running the public integrity section at the Justice Department. Yes, there is a public integrity section of the Justice Department, despite all evidence to the contrary. And Judicial Watch uncovered how that Justice Department agency was working with Lois Lerner to try to figure out ways to prosecute the same groups and people that Lerner's IRS was abusively targeting. So it wasn't just giving them audits or delaying their applications for Tea Party groups. It was figuring out ways to put them in jail. And as a result of that investigation, we found out that the IRS gave virtually every document they had on social welfare organizations or political groups here in the United States to the FBI in violation of the law. Smith, according to the records we uncovered, directed the head of the Justice Department's Election Crimes Branch to meet with Lois Lerner. In one email obtained by Judicial Watch, Lerner discussed an idea that the Justice Department had that could build false statement cases against tax-exempt conservative groups. So their theory of the law was, again, unprecedented, novel applications of the law to try to jail then the political enemies of Barack Obama, or as they perceived them. They were saying that if you filed an application saying you were going to do this as a political group and you did, quote, that, meaning spent too much money on politics, that you were going to be prosecuted for signing a fake, a false statement. It was completely outrageous. Just think about that. You sign a form saying you're going to engage in social welfare activities, which allows political spending to a certain amount, and they decide subsequently you spent more money than you should have, according to their own new rules, and they're going to put you in jail for, quote, lying to begin with. I mean, even Lerner was skeptical of that, but of course she cooperated fully. So this is where Jack Smith came from. His people were figuring out ways how to jail Obama's political enemies just before the 2012 re-election for Obama. And people wonder what happened to the Tea Party groups after 2010. They had that big victory in 2010, and then they disappeared for 2012. Well, they were suppressed by Lois Lerner's IRS in league with the Justice Department agency then run by Jack Smith, who now, again, is targeting Trump on the eve of another election for Obama's vice president, now President Joe Biden. Just corrupt. So they don't want to give us the documents, so we sued in court for them. So it's going to be a battle, and you can bet Jack Smith's team is nothing but Democrats going after Trump. It's a trawling, fishing expedition. The reports are that they're investigating state legislators for daring to dispute Biden's election, citizens who were trying to, under the law, create alternative slates of electors. They're investigating fundraising by the Republican Party and the Trump team. I mean, it's like the Democratic Party is running Jack Smith's special counsel operation. And I can confirm that because I saw the types of questions and the attitude, more importantly, the attitude from the prosecutors pushing what I think to be a meritless investigation of President Trump and abuse of power. So your Judicial Watch is under attack. And I know, I ask for support a lot, but I encourage you to support Judicial Watch. We had to spend a lot of money dealing with this. And, any little bit you can support us with would be great. Because that's money we don't have now to do the work you generally want us to do, which is to fight the bad guys in government and educate the American people about what they're doing. So they tried to scare me from talking about what happened to that grand jury. And I know because you support me and you support Judicial Watch that I really didn't have any reason to be scared, right? Because it's easy to stand strong for the rule of law when I know there are folks like you out there supporting us. And of course, the team here at Judicial Watch, we're standing strong as well. So thank you for your support, and I encourage you to increase it if you are currently supporting us. And if you're not, you really should support us, because the Justice Department abuse of Judicial Watch. Imagine, by the way, I just want to go back on this grand jury issue. If the head of the ACLU was brought in, or the head of the NAACP. This is how brazen and abusive the Biden Justice Department is. They brought in the head of the government's #1 antagonist in terms of battling corruption, Judicial Watch. The #1 litigator against the Justice Department. The head of an anti-corruption watchdog group that was criticizing Justice Department policy and behavior. And they harassed us with a senseless grand jury subpoena that wasted, in my view, everyone's time. So when you hear folks say, well, Aragon in Turkey is terrible, or Putin in Moscow is terrible, and all these strong men abroad are terrible, just remember that. If it was happening in Turkey or in Russia or in other places where dissent is frowned upon, all the usual suspects would be saying, oh, that's terrible. It's happening in Washington, and I know Judicial Watch has been, I know because Judicial Watch has been targeted by it. And before I go, I want to talk to you about more corruption by the irredeemably corrupt FBI and Justice Department, I would add. Now, I've talked to you previously about how there is a form out there that basically a whistleblower went to James Comer and Charles Grassley, who's the senator from Iowa. And the whistleblower said there's a document the FBI has detailing an allegation, a substantial allegation, that then Vice President Biden was involved in a bribery scheme involving a foreign national. And it's quite obvious that based on Comer's interest in this and Grassley's interest in getting this document, it's substantive. So it's not like it was like a tip that came from someone calling from a street corner. In fact, Fox News said that the confidential human source they're reporting today was someone that the FBI had repeatedly used and had been deemed as credible, used during the Obama administration as well. So this is a substantial allegation against Biden, and it certainly fits in and is consistent with the information we already know about Biden corruption through the Hunter Biden laptop, Tony Bobulinski, the new records that Comer has highlighted showing these unusual foreign transfers of monies to front companies for the Biden family, 10% for the big guy, all of that. But Director Wray, and there's a form in which the FBI has documented this allegation, and of course there's got to be, I hope there's an investigative file. I guess the concern by the whistleblower is that this was buried, so that's going to be interesting to see. And of course Wray doesn't want to turn it over. And he's resisting it so much, he was willing to almost go into contempt, that still may happen, and create a constitutional crisis, all to protect Biden from being exposed potentially to more significant public allegations of corruption. So this is the most recent letter I could find on Comer's Comer's concern to Wray about his failure to comply with a subpoena about this document. He had asked back in, I guess it was almost a month ago now, for these records. The whistleblower disclosures indicated that the FBI and Department of Justice are in possession of what is called an FD 1023 form describing an alleged criminal scheme involving then Vice President Biden and a foreign national relating to the exchange of money for policy decisions. That same day, the committee also issued a subpoena, that was on May 3rd, requiring the production of all FD 1023 forms, including within any open, closed, or restricted access case files created or modified in June 2020, containing the term Biden, including all accompanying attachments and documents to those FD 23 forms. So it's a pretty comprehensive request, but narrow enough that they can respond pretty quickly. And they were supposed to give them the documents on May 10th. And it's now June, what is it, the 2nd today? And they still don't have the documents. And Comer in this letter goes through the back and forth, which I won't get into because it was just the FBI stonewalling. But what I found interesting about this letter is the disclosure of the following information. The FBI's refusal to produce this single document is obstructionist. Nevertheless, to narrow the breadth of the subpoena, we are providing additional terms based on unclassified and legally protected whistleblower disclosures that may be referenced in the FD 1023 form. So I guess Comer is pretending to believe that the FBI may not know exactly what form they're looking for. And he uses the following search terms. He adds them. June 30th, 2020. So this seems to be an indication that this is going on right in the middle of the election season. And $5 million. He didn't say $5 million, but I don't know about you, but what conclusion do you draw from that? Did the bribery scheme involve something around June of 2020, and did it involve $5 million? I don't know. So, long story short, the FBI Director Chris Wray is been threatened with a contempt citation by the House of Representatives for refusing to abide by this simple subpoena. Now, they offered to let Comer come over and review the document, though heavily redacted. I think Grassley saw the document. He wants to release it. I mean, there's no ifs, ands, or buts. I don't know if you know Chuck Grassley, but he's probably nearly 90 now, and he doesn't really suffer fools gladly. He just doesn't give a crap about the typical government obstruction that other senators and congressmen tolerate. And I don't always agree with every one of his votes. Who does? But when it comes to matters of whistleblowers and government corruption, he's been a long-term leader that I've admired for some time. And he's like, well, I think there's something here. I don't know whether the allegation is true. I do want to know if the FBI investigated it, and I do want the document released. So where things stand now is that Wray or people from the FBI are going to bring it over to Comer at the House next week, and we'll see if that's sufficient enough for Comer to withdraw or to stay the contempt citation. But it just shows you the hypocrisy of this Justice Department that has prosecuted others for contempt of Congress, but is engaged in active obstruction and contempt of Congress on a document to protect Joe Biden. Now, they've always have a bunch of reasons for not wanting to turn a record over, none of which hold water legally or constitutionally. And just because you have objections, it doesn't mean that you get to stop producing records. You give the record, there are ways legally to assert these objections while providing the requested material, and the FBI wasn't interested in doing that. So this was just more corruption by the FBI. And what's frustrating about this is, in my view, is that Wray should have been found in contempt a long time ago. And I guarantee you that a further investigation, or even just asking the question, will show that Wray had the approval of Garland to withhold this information. I mean, the Justice Department is part of the FBI. People forget this. The FBI is not, quote, an independent agency. The FBI is an agency within the Justice Department and answers to Attorney General Garland. So what did Garland know about this contempt for Congress by Wray? And the other frustrating thing is, despite all this corruption by the FBI, this is just more of the same, right? I mean, they've been burying Biden material. We've had it alleged time and time again, quite credibly, since at least 2019, if not before then, is that the FBI and Justice Department get all the money in the world still. I mean, you've had this big fight this week about this debt funding, which resulted in the incredible, the incredible outcome that the debt ceiling has been completely removed. You heard that right. There is no debt ceiling. So Congress can spend as much money as they want in terms of adding debt to your liabilities, right, and those of your children and grandchildren. And of course, all those monies include currently full funding for the FBI and Justice Department at extreme levels. Like the FBI's budget is, now I'm going on memory because I saw the budget document a few weeks ago. What did I say it was, 13 billion? Yeah. I think that's what they're asking for. It's 11 to 13 billion. They have 37,000 people working for the FBI. No haircut for them, though, despite this corruption. So Judicial Watch has separately asked for this document. And now, is it possible we won't sue for it when we don't get it? I guess that's possible, but unlikely. I know. I haven't been here for, I think it's now almost 25 years at Judicial Watch. I can say with some certainty that we will likely sue for this document, and we will likely be fighting about it and may even get a public version of it before we get it from Congress, because usually that's what happens. So you could be sure that despite this game that Congress is playing, and I appreciate Comer pushing hard on this, and Grassley pushing hard on this. I mean, in the past, it was a year or two of fighting before Attorney General Holder was found in contempt. And it was done over the objections of the House leadership at the time, the Republican House leadership. Here, McCarthy, I don't agree with McCarthy's approach on the debt and tactical issues like that, but he's been hardcore on this particular corruption issue and very insistent that Wray do what he's supposed to do as required by law. So they've moved relatively quickly on this, but it doesn't mean they're going to get the document in a public way as soon as we like. But who knows? I mean, I got to hand it to them. They have been getting some information out there that previously would have taken some time to get. And a lot of that, and I'm going to praise Judicial Watch here. I'm not doing it because I guess I am doing it because I'm president of Judicial Watch, but I think it's a fair analysis because I speak to a lot of members of Congress that Judicial Watch, our work, our historic work uncovering records that Congress has been unable to uncover, or had been unable to uncover, incentivize members of Congress to do more to get the records, because no one likes to be shown up, right? I mean, all these members of Congress, if I had a nickel for every member of Congress who said, I can't believe you get these records and we can't. And they're tired of it. And they should be tired of it because they have a right to these records as Congress in a way that Judicial Watch, we can't get all the records that even Congress can get. But we usually pursue it through a legal process, and Congress has got this political process they have to go through first. So it's Judicial Watch's leadership that I think has helped spur this much more significant interest and aggressiveness by the House in investigating government corruption. Is it as much and is it as aggressive as I like it to be? No, it never probably will be. But it's leagues better than it used to be. So kudos to Judicial Watch for, again, showing the way and providing leadership to Congress in how to investigate and provide oversight over this ginormous government we have. So again, we only do that with your support. I encourage you to come back here next week because I know we've got many, many planes on the runway in terms of lawsuits and investigative materials to discuss next week as well. But in the meantime, thank you for your support. It makes it easier to appear before grand juries harassing and trying to destroy Judicial Watch under the Biden administration and the Justice Department. And I tell you, it sounds like it's a bear, but it's a lot easier to bear because of your strong support for our work. And I'll see you here next time on the Judicial Watch Weekly Update. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and like our video down below.